my daughter-in-law laughed at my quilts for 3 years. But the morning she called my handmade wedding gift for her daughter an embarrassment in front of the guests, something inside me that had been bending for a very long time finally broke clean. I am Winifred Oakes. I am 64 years old, widowed, and I live alone in the same pale yellow house in Greenfield, Indiana, where my husband Edmund and I raised our 2 boys. The house is small by most standards. The porch sags a little on the left side, where Edmund always meant to fix it and never got the chance. The maple tree in the front yard drops leaves every October in colors so bright, they almost look painted. I planted that tree the year our youngest son was born. Most mornings I wake up before 6 because my body never learned how to sleep past sunrise. I make oatmeal in the pot Edmund bought at a church sale in 1998. I sit at the kitchen table with my coffee, and I look at the light coming through the curtains I sewed myself. Cotton with tiny blue flowers. Nothing fancy. Just something I made one winter afternoon because I needed something to do with my hands. Edmund has been gone for 9 years. I still reach for his side of the bed sometimes in the dark before I remember. Grief is strange that way. It does not behave the way people promise it will. My husband was a quiet man, a good man. He worked 27 years as a postal carrier, and he never once complained about sore feet or bad weather. He came home every evening smelling like cold air and walked straight to wherever I was in the house, the kitchen, the sewing room, the back porch, and put his hand on my shoulder. Just that. Just a hand on my shoulder. He did that every day for 31 years. Edmund loved my quilts. Not in a polite way. Not the way people admire something they do not understand. He actually understood them. He knew that the green triangles in our bedroom quilt came from a dress I wore on our first date. He knew the yellow squares in the one on the guest bed were cut from his mother's tablecloth after she passed. He used to say that quilts were the only kind of book that kept everyone warm while you read them. After he died, quilting became the way I breathed. I had been sewing since I was 9 years old. My mother taught me, and her mother had taught her, and somewhere back there the thread went on long before anyone thought to write it down. Over the years I made quilts for every occasion that mattered. Christenings, graduations, weddings, funerals. I made quilts for neighbors going through chemotherapy. I made quilts for young couples just starting out who could not afford warm things. I made quilts because it was the one language I had always spoken fluently. My older son is Garrett Oakes. He is 41, lives 20 minutes away, works as an electrician, and is the kind of man who still calls me every Sunday evening without being asked. He is steady in the way his father was steady. He does not make promises he cannot keep. My younger son is Leland Oakes. Leland is 38. He moved to Charlotte, North Carolina 11 years ago for a job in commercial real estate and never came back except for holidays. Leland is not a bad man. He has a good heart somewhere underneath all the ambition. But Leland married Courtney Aldridge 6 years ago, and Courtney Aldridge was the kind of woman who confused expensive things with valuable ones. Courtney grew up in a suburb outside of Atlanta. Her parents were both attorneys. She had never in her life sat at a table where someone passed food family style, and she seemed to regard the entire state of Indiana as something quaint that other people came from. When Leland first brought her home, she stood in my living room and looked around slowly in that way people do when they are trying to decide whether to say something or not. She chose not to. But I saw it. At first, Courtney was simply distant, cold the way a house is cold when no one has lived in it for a while. But then Leland and Courtney had a daughter, my granddaughter Hazel, and something about Courtney shifted. She started finding things to say. It began small, the way these things always do. The first Christmas after Hazel was born, I gave them a quilt I had been working on for 4 months. Soft greens and pale golds, the colors Leland always loved as a boy. I had cut small squares from one of Edmund's flannel shirts, from a dress Leland wore as a baby, from fabric I had been saving for something that mattered. I had quilted a small sunburst in the center the way my grandmother taught me. I wrapped it carefully and set it under the tree. When Courtney opened it, she held it up and tilted her head. "Oh," she said. "Handmade." She said it the way someone says, "Oh, well," the kind of sentence that does not need a period because it is already finished. Leland immediately said it was beautiful. I watched his face when he said it and I believed him. But Courtney folded it back in the box before Hazel could reach for it, and I did not see that quilt again on any of my visits. I told myself she was young. I told myself she did not understand yet. The following year, Courtney and Leland hosted Thanksgiving at their home in Charlotte for the first time. It was a big, beautiful house in a neighborhood where all the lawns looked professionally managed, and all the cars in the driveways were less than 3 years old. I drove down with Garrett and his wife Simone's, and we arrived to find Courtney had arranged catering from a restaurant downtown. Everything was presented in white ceramic dishes, with sprigs of rosemary placed across the top. There was not a single dish that looked like anything Edmund and I had ever eaten on a holiday. I had brought a pie. A sweet potato pie from my mother's recipe, the same one I had been making every November since I was 22 years old. I set it on the kitchen counter. Courtney looked at it and said, without quite smiling, "Oh, Winifred, you really didn't have to." She moved it to a corner of the counter near the recycling bin and never brought it out at dinner. Garrett caught my eye across the table. He said nothing. He did not have to. After that Thanksgiving, the comments came more regularly. Not always loud, not always cruel, but consistent, the way rain is consistent when it decides to stay. Courtney made observations about my clothes. Very classic, Winifred, very Midwest. She made observations about my house when she visited. It's so cozy, like a little museum. She made observations about my quilts every time one appeared. It must take so long. Where do you even find the time? I just think people's time is worth more now. She always laughed when she said these things. Leland always looked at his phone when she said them. And I always smiled and changed the subject because I believed, the way mothers always believe too long, that if I just kept the peace would hold. But peace built on silence is not peace. I learned that too slowly. The thing that finally broke me was the wedding quilt. Courtney's niece, a young woman named Brianna, was getting married in the spring. Courtney had mentioned it once in passing, in the way she mentioned most things to me, as information that did not require my involvement. But I had met Brianna twice and liked her. She was warm and funny, and she had sat next to me at a family dinner once, and asked me to tell her how quilts were made because she genuinely wanted to know. So I spent 6 months working on a wedding quilt for Brianna. I used white and ivory fabrics with pale blue thread. I hand-stitched a double wedding ring pattern. The oldest pattern I knew, the one my grandmother made for my parents, and around the border I quilted their initials, twined together, surrounded by small flowers I had drawn myself and transferred to the fabric stitch by stitch. I worked on it in the evenings, in the early mornings, on weekends. I played records while I sewed. Sometimes I talked to Edmund while I worked the way people talk to someone they know is listening from somewhere they cannot see. When it was finished, I held it up in my sewing room and I felt proud. Not the small, apologetic kind of proud, the real kind. I mailed it to Courtney's address 2 weeks before the wedding with a handwritten note explaining the pattern and the tradition behind it. The wedding was held at a venue in Charlotte. I was not invited. Brianna's family was large, and the guest list was limited, which I understood completely. But Courtney was there, and Leland was there. I found out what happened 3 days after the wedding. Garrett called me on a Tuesday evening while I was threading a needle at my kitchen table. His voice had that tight, careful quality it gets when he is trying to figure out how to say something. "Mom," he said. "I need to tell you something," Leland told me. I set the needle down. At the gift opening, Courtney had presented the quilt to Brianna in front of a room full of people. She had held it up and said, and these were her words, repeated to Leland, who repeated them to Garrett. "This is from Edmund's mother. She made it herself. Very vintage, very Indiana." People had laughed, not cruelly, not loudly, but enough. Brianna had thanked me genuinely in a card she sent later, but Courtney had stood in a room full of people and used my name and my work as a punchline. And my granddaughter Hazel, who had been sitting in that room, had looked at her grandmother's quilt and then looked at the people laughing and had not known what to think. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after Garrett hung up. I did not cry right away. I looked at the half-finished square in my hands, and I thought about the 6 months I had spent on that quilt. I thought about the piece of Edmund's flannel shirt I had considered, including before deciding to save it for something closer to home. I thought about Brianna's kind face and the way she had asked me genuine questions about things she wanted to understand. And I thought about how many times I had let Courtney's comments pass because I was afraid that saying something would cost me my son. Garrett came over the next morning. He found me in the sewing room, not sewing, just sitting. He pulled up the old wooden chair Edmund used to sit in when he would read while I worked, and he looked at me for a long moment. "You don't look angry," he said carefully. "I'm not angry," I said, and that was the strange thing. I was not angry. I was tired. There is a difference, and after a certain number of years you learn to recognize it. Garrett leaned forward. "She used Hazel to do it, Mom. Hazel was sitting right there." That part I had not allowed myself to think about until he said it out loud. My granddaughter, 4 years old, watching the room laugh at something her grandmother made. Learning something without any words being spoken directly to her. That was the moment something in me changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly, the way a decision changes you, from the inside out, before you have even found the words for it yet. I did not call Leland. Not that day. Instead, I went to my sewing room and I took down every unfinished project I had started for Leland and Courtney's household. A table runner I had been making for their dining room. A small lap quilt I had planned for Hazel's birthday. I folded them carefully and placed them in a box on the shelf. Not thrown away, just put away. Then, I sat down and began working on something for myself. The first quilt I had made for myself in 11 years. 3 days later, Leland called. His voice was careful in the way it gets when Courtney has told him to call. I know my sons. I know the difference between a call that comes from him and a call that comes at him. "Mom," he said. "Courtney wanted me to check in." "I'm fine," I said. A pause. She said she was afraid the joke might have landed wrong. I looked out the kitchen window at the maple tree. "It wasn't a joke, Leland." Another pause. Longer. "She didn't mean anything by it." "She meant exactly what she said," I replied. "She's been meaning it for 6 years. Silence. "Mom, I'm not angry at you," I said carefully. "But I need you to understand something. 6 years is a long time to make someone feel small in her own family." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Leland said, "You're being a little dramatic." That sentence settled into me like cold water, because I recognized it. It was not Leland's sentence. It had Courtney's shape, her rhythm, and it told me everything I needed to know about how things stood. "I love you," I told my son. "I'll talk to you soon." I hung up feeling hollowed out, not because of what he said, because of who said it in his voice. Garrett came by that Friday with a casserole his wife Simone had made. Simone was a quiet, practical woman who showed love through food and never wasted words she did not mean. She sat across from me at the table while Garrett stood by the stove, and neither of them tried to fix anything, which was exactly right. "What are you going to do?" Garrett asked eventually. I thought about it. "I'm going to keep making quilts," I said, "but I'm going to stop making them for people who treat them like a punchline." It sounded simple when I says it. It did not feel simple at all. The spring festival at the Greenfield Community Arts Center happened every April. I had participated twice before, years ago, but stopped when Edmund got sick, and never quite started again. My friend Helen Marsden, a woman I had known since our children were in elementary school together, had been running the textile exhibition portion of the festival for the past 4 years. She called me in March. "Winifred Oakes," she said. The way she always said my full name when she wanted something. "I have a booth with your name on it." I told her I was not sure. "You've been quilting for 50 years, Helen said. "The only reason people don't know that is because you've spent the last decade giving everything away to people who don't deserve it." That sentence sat with me long after I got off the phone. I thought about Courtney in that wedding hall, holding up my quilt like a curiosity. I thought about 6 years of sweet potato pies, quietly moved to corners. I thought about Edmund's flannel shirt, the pieces of him I had stitched into things that were meant to be loved, and had instead been folded away into boxes. I called Helen back the next morning. "I'll take the booth," I said. "I spent 3 weeks preparing. I brought 12 quilts to the festival. Some old, some new. I brought the one made from Edmund's flannel and 2 of his old work shirts, which I had never shown anyone. I brought the double wedding ring quilt I had made at 25 that had hung in our bedroom until Edmund died, and then I could not look at it anymore. And finally, slowly, I could again. The morning of the festival, I almost stayed home. At 64, fear has very good reasons for everything. I stood in my kitchen holding my car keys and talked myself through it, the way Edmund used to talk me through things when I was afraid. 1 foot, Nick, he used to say. Except he called me Win, which was short for nothing, just his name for me. 1 foot. Then the other one. Helen found me in the parking lot and walked me to my booth like I was a dignitary. She had made a small sign, Winifred Oakes, Traditional Quilts, Greenfield, Indiana. It's too plain, I told her. It's exactly right, she said. The festival filled through the morning. People wandered past. Then a woman stopped in front of the quilt made from Edmund's shirts. She stood there for a long time. Did you make this? She asked. I did. My grandmother made quilts, she said. Not to me, really. More to herself. I didn't understand it when I was young. I do now. She bought it. I cried in the bathroom afterward. Not from sadness. From something that does not have a clean name. Something between being found and being forgiven for having doubted yourself. By the afternoon, I had sold 7 quilts. But more than that, people had talked to me. A retired schoolteacher who had learned to quilt during the Depression. 3 women in their 30s who wanted to learn. A man in his 70s who asked if I could teach a class because his wife had passed, and she had left behind unfinished quilt tops, and he wanted to complete them for his grandchildren. That one broke me open a little. Helen came by near the end of the day. She looked at my nearly empty booth and then at my face. I told you, she said simply. On the drive home, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I had sold anything. Because I remembered something I had forgotten. That what I made mattered, not just to the people who received it, but in itself. The making mattered. The skill mattered. The 50 years of mourning sitting at a frame with thread and fabric and patience. That mattered. I was still in the parking lot when my phone rang. Leland. I sat in the car and let it ring twice before I answered. Mom. His voice was strange. Off balance in a way I had not heard in a long time. Courtney showed me something. All right, I said carefully. A pause. She pulled up the festival page online. There's a photo of you, and a small article. Helen had mentioned something about the local paper sending someone. I had not paid much attention. Okay, I said. It says, he stopped. Started again. It says you're one of the most skilled traditional quilters in the county. That people were lined up at your booth. I looked out at the parking lot. The light was going golden the way it does in April evenings. Yes, I said simply. Silence. I didn't know you were doing the festival. You didn't ask. Another silence. Longer, and then Leland said something I was not expecting. Courtney said, you only did it to embarrass her. I closed my eyes briefly. Because of course she did. Because that is what people believe when they have spent years making others feel small. They assume everyone else is doing what they would do. Leland, I said quietly. I did it because your father always believed I should. I just finally believed it too. He didn't have an answer for that. That night, Courtney posted something on social media. I found out because Garrett called before I had even finished my dinner. She had written a long caption under a photo. Not of me, but of one of her home interior posts, saying something about how certain older relatives had developed a habit of seeking public validation, and that traditional crafts were charming, but should not be mistaken for professional skills. She had not named me. She did not have to. Leland was tagged. Anyone who knew us would know. Garrett's voice on the phone was very controlled, which is how I know he is furious. She's unbelievable. Let it go, I said. Mom, I mean it, Garrett. I set down my fork. People can see it clearly enough without us saying anything. And it turned out they could. By the following morning, the comments under Courtney's post had not gone the way she intended. People who had been at the festival, people who knew me from town, people who had simply looked at the quilts in the photo from the article and recognized something real. They had found their way to her comments. I did not read all of them, but Helen read them to me on the phone, selecting the parts she felt were essential. Someone wrote, Helen said, with the contained glee of a woman who has waited for dismissal. I stood in front of that woman's quilts for 20 minutes and I cried. Whatever you're selling, I don't want it. I put my hand over my mouth. There's more, Helen said, but I think you understand the tone. That evening, Leland called again, this time without Courtney's voice in his. Mom, he said, I think I owe you an apology. I sat down at the kitchen table. All right, I knew she made those comments. I knew about the pie. I knew about Brianna's wedding. He exhaled. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, that you didn't mind. I always minded, I said gently, a quiet stretch on the line. I think I let her make you feel small because it was easier than disagreeing with her, he said, and that was wrong. I did not rush to reassure him. I let the words sit where he put them, because he needed to feel the weight of them, not be rescued from it. I know, I said finally. I don't know what to do about Courtney, he admitted. She's not going to apologize. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. That's between you and her, I said. What I need from you is simpler than that. What? I need you to stop letting people disrespect me in your presence, I said. That's all. You don't have to fight anyone. You just have to stop being quiet. Silence. That's fair, he said finally. His voice was smaller than I had heard it since he was very young. Not weak, just real. We stayed on the phone longer than we usually do. We talked about Edmund for a while, which we almost never do. Leland asked me what Edmund used to say when things were hard, and I told him. One foot, then the other. He laughed a little. It wasn't healed. Healing doesn't happen in a phone call, but it was something. Courtney did not call. I had not expected her to. There is a particular kind of pride that cannot bend without snapping, and I recognized it in her because I had watched it operate for 6 years. She would need time, maybe a great deal of time. That was between her and whoever she became. 3 weeks later, Leland drove up to Greenfield alone. He did not bring Courtney. He arrived on a Saturday morning while I was in the sewing room. I heard his car in the driveway, and I heard him knock at the back door the way the boys always did. 3 quick knocks, a habit from childhood that neither of them had ever lost. I opened the door. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had been having difficult conversations in a house where difficult conversations were not easy. Hi, Mom! Hi! I said. He came inside and stood in the kitchen and looked around. The way people look at a place they grew up in after too much time away, like they are chisya to see if anything essential has changed. I put the kettle on. We sat at the kitchen table for a long time. He asked to see what I was working on, and I brought him into the sewing room and showed him the quilt I had started for myself. Deep burgundy and forest green and old gold, colors I had been saving for years for something that would finally be mine. He stood looking at it for a long moment. It's beautiful, he said, and he meant it, the way his father used to mean it. I did not say anything. I did not need to. He asked, eventually, what I thought about coming down to Charlotte for Hazel's 5th birthday in the summer. Not a big visit, just a weekend. He said Hazel had asking for me. He said she had found a picture of a quilt on my phone once when she was playing with it, and had asked him why she didn't have one. My chest tightened in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. We'll see, I said. He nodded. He did not push. That was new. Before he left, he stood in the doorway of the sewing room and looked at me the way Edmund used to look at me sometimes. Like he was trying to memorize something he had been taking for granted. She shouldn't have done what she did at the wedding, he said. None of it. I should have said something a long time ago. Yes, I said simply. You should have. He nodded. But you're saying it now, I said. He left around noon. I watched his car back out of the driveway, and I stood in the kitchen after it disappeared, and I thought about what Edmund would have made of all of it. He would have been proud of Leland for driving up. He would have been impatient with the years it took. He would have put his hand on my shoulder and not said very much. I went back to the sewing room. I sat down in front of the burgundy and green quilt. The one for no one but me, and I picked up my needle. There is something I know now that I did not know for a long time. Loving people is not the same as disappearing for them. For years, I had confused the two. I thought the kindest thing I could do was absorb things quietly, keep the table set, keep the peace intact, keep everyone comfortable even when I was not. I thought that was what a mother was supposed to do. But the quilts showed me something. Every quilt I ever made carried part of me in it. The hours, the care, the choices, the memories pressed into fabric. When I let people dismiss those quilts, I was letting them dismiss the thing that held the most of me. and I had been doing it with a smile and a changed subject for 6 years. The week after the festival, 3 people contacted me about teaching quilting. I said yes to all 3. Helen Marsden turned out to know the director of the County Arts Council, who turned out to have a small grant for traditional textile arts instruction. And by June, I was teaching 2 sessions a week in the same community hall where the festival had been held. The man who had lost his wife and wanted to finish her quilt tops was in my first class. His name was Gerald Beaumont. He was 72 years old, and he sat at the frame with enormous hands that had spent their whole lives doing other work. And he was absolutely terrible for the first 3 weeks, and absolutely determined for every week after. He finished one of his wife's quilt tops at the end of the spring session, and he held it up when he was done, and did not say anything for a full minute. That is what I am made of, I thought. That is what I have always been made of. The summer visit to Charlotte did not happen quite as Leland planned. Courtney was polite when I arrived, cool and careful, but polite. She did not make any comments about my quilts, which I recognized as effort on her part even if it did not feel like warmth. Hazel ran to me at the door. She had grown since I last saw her. She took my hand and pulled me down the hallway to her room, and pointed to the wall above her bed. There, hung carefully with 2 small white tacks, was the quilt I had made Leland and Courtney for Christmas 3 years ago. The green and gold one, the one I had not seen since the morning they took it back to Charlotte. Daddy hung it, Hazel told me. He said, it's special because Grandpa Edmund is in it. I pressed my fingers together and did not let myself cry. He's right, I said. Hazel looked at it for a moment with the complete and uncomplicated seriousness of a child who has not yet learned to be embarrassed of love. I want one with me in it, she said. I looked at my granddaughter, at her small serious face and her total certainty that this was a reasonable thing to ask for. Then you'll have one, I said. I started it when I got home. I am working on it now. The center will be a star pattern in her 2 favorite colors, yellow and a very specific orange she calls the good orange. And around the edges I am going to stitch every season she has been alive in, 1/4 for each year. It is slow work. The most important things usually are. I sit in my sewing room in the mornings and I listen to the birds outside, and I pull thread through fabric and I think about Edmund and about Leland, and about how families are not made once, and then finished but have to be remade, over and over, in ordinary ways, with phone calls and kitchen tables, and the slow hard work of saying the true things instead of the easy ones. I still do not know what Courtney will become. That is not mine to determine. I know what I am. I have always known. It just took me too long to stop letting other people narrate it for me. One stitch, then the next. That is how a quilt gets made. That is how most things worth having get made. Edmund knew that. Now I do too.